All right, team, we are back in the Fireside PM podcast, and I have an old friend, Rodolfo, who is in the hot seat today because he wrote this really interesting LinkedIn post and Substack article about a hack he learned for doing better in PM interviews. And I said, hey, Rodolfo, we should get you into the Fireside discussion. And you were kind enough to say yes. So welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Tom. It's a pleasure. Like Tom, you've been a mentor for a while, so I'm pretty excited to be here. And hi to everyone.
I love it. Yeah, I'm very grateful for the kind of network of relationships that I've developed over the years, and I still remember you and I talking about different options for you down the road, and so glad that you're thriving. Maybe for starters, why don't you just give the audience a little bit of a background about who you are and kind of your journey to where you are today?
Yeah, awesome. I'll just start with where I am right now. I'm a senior product manager at Spotify, where I lead a team that builds 0 to 1 products to help us acquire new users. A lot of this is through word of mouth and organic user-to-user connections. I know Tom because I went to Harvard Business School, and while I was there, I had a lot of questions about what to do with my career, what type of offer to take, what type of company to go to, and he helped guide me through those. To now answer your question directly, in terms of my career journey, I started my career as a consultant. I quickly realized that was a mistake. Apologize anyone that's in consulting right now. It was a mistake for me, not for everyone. And then found myself working in an operations role at Facebook. And that was kind of what opened my eyes to what tech is, and where I started working with product managers. And through that experience of working directly with product teams, it opened up my eyes and said, hey, I told myself, hey, I want to be a PM. And I started working a lot with these PMs, expanding my core scope and taking on work that these PMs would give me to mentor me, grow into the role. Ultimately left Facebook to join Reddit. And then after a while at Reddit, I decided that my time as a PM was useful, but I needed to expand my skill set to be able to make up for lost time and give myself a competitive advantage beyond just being a PM, since I had less experience as other people my age because I'd started late, and decided to combine that with that business school experience that helped me then meet Tom and get experience at a startup called Cameo, where I was able to really supercharge my career because of the fact that the organizational structure was much more leaner, and I needed to be accountable to the CPO and the CEO on my decisions. And from there, I leapfrogged from that role to where I am right now at Spotify, basically doing my dream job because I love music. I'll pass it back to you, Tom.
Yeah, I have a few questions before we get into the meat of the discussion. First is, what advice would you give to people who, let's say they are earlier in their career, and maybe they're in business school and they're thinking about consulting and product management. It seems like in the last 5 to 10 years, there's been a nice shift of interest into product management from a lot of business school students. It wasn't like a hot thing when I was coming out of the program. I'm curious, what would be some things that you found, really resonated with you when you decided to jump into this function? Because it's a unique job function.
Totally. I'd say the first thing I tell anyone is to have a hypothesis and test it. A lot of times people jump into a career because it's the hot thing or the thing that will open up the most options. So for example, when I was in college, everyone wanted to be a consultant. And the reason everyone wanted to be a consultant was because I will get exposure to all these senior leaders and talk to all these CEOs. And then I will open many other doors that I find more interesting in the future. And I've heard a lot of people that decide that they want to be PMs for the same reasons, because they say, hey, I'm going to have ownership and I'm going to be able to be a better founder, or I'm going to be a better CEO by being a PM. And it's not that I don't think being a PM helps you with these things, but if you have these hypotheses, just go with the thing that helps you directly test it. So if you have the opportunity to be a CEO, to be a startup founder, do that if that's what you really want to do versus just being a PM. Now, if you want to go into product and you're asking me, hey, Rodolfo, what are the things that you find helpful for joining product and testing whether this is the right thing for you? If you're in a place like business school where you don't need to work, I'd say like try and do something that's unpaid that helps you test what it's like to be a PM. So that could be volunteering at your friend's startup or at a local startup and asking for product management work. It could be just starting the idea of a company with someone else and doing the product work yourself. So something that helps you test the day to day. If you're in a different place in your career, oh, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was just gonna build on that point. I feel like I have this conversation a few times a month with folks who, from my undergrad, are like, "Hey, I want to get into product, but I don't have any product experience, and you know, I haven't been getting any formal offers yet in product roles." And I'll recommend, similarly to what you were saying, like, well, you could always incubate an idea and do the customer research and ideate on a product concept and do some paper prototyping. And nowadays you could even get like a software-based MVP pretty quickly using some AI tools, even if you're not a coder yourself. And what's interesting is that I think a third of the time the people really take that advice and run with it, but a lot of people are maybe hoping for like an apprentice program or a APM program. And I think in today's market, you kind of have to make your own experience. And if you wait for the perfect onboarding path, then your odds are just going to be a little bit really, really narrow. So I just want to kind of build on that. I think it's great advice. And the other thing is, like, if you're not comfortable with the idea of coming up with a new concept and testing it and iterating on it, then like you might not like the PM job, even if you got one.
Or even like the point of the PM job is you've done this. It's not standard. Like my PM job at Spotify is not the same as my PM job at Cameo, at Reddit, or when I was at Facebook. The PM job, you need to be malleable in that way to be able to shape your role depending on the stage of the company and the type of company that you're at. So I totally agree with you, Tom. I actually have like a very interesting story of what you said. I'd say like it's even more common amongst like MBA grads, MBA students from top programs that want this sort of structure, and same with undergrads. They want the same structure that they've had in their schooling, in their career. And it almost makes it harder to get the job. Like when I was at Facebook, for example, Facebook used to have, I'm not sure if it still has its rotational PM program. And I remember applying for it and getting rejected and feeling crushed, but then deciding that that wasn't going to stop me. And I luckily had a lot of PM mentors at Facebook that told me, hey, if you're willing to work more, we'll make you our own RPM program, but you're going to have to do your day job and do this. And I did that. And I think I got even better training than some of the other people, or at least for me, because I got to work in multiple products and work with these really senior people at like more senior levels than maybe I would have if I'd gotten babied doing like the beginner rotational program with an expectation that I knew nothing.
Yeah, and it's analogous, maybe a somewhat lighter version of advice we often give to founders, which is if a person's thinking of starting a company and they're only open to joining an accelerator and an official structured program, of course, if you get in and it's a great program, you should strongly consider it. But if you don't, and you're like, well, then I guess I'm not going to be an entrepreneur, it's I think an indication like, okay, maybe that's not what you're really looking for, because an entrepreneur has to like make luck happen for themselves and isn't going to take no for an answer. To your point, like where you basically moonlight for another team and do their PM grunge work, but you kind of make your bones that way, and you probably learned a ton, as you mentioned.
Totally. And that would be my second point of advice. Like recapping your question, what advice I have for people, if you're lucky enough to get into one of these rotational programs, do that. If you're one of like the normal people in the world, that like most people in the world, because there aren't that many spots for that, you either make your own opportunity outside of a company by like interning, creating your company, or you make an opportunity within the company that you're at, where you try and moonlight like I did and learn the skills. And then I'd expand on that one a little bit. You can moonlight as a PM. And if you can't moonlight as a PM, try and moonlight in roles that are adjacent to a PM so you can see directly what they're doing and learning the skills of a PM.
Yeah, that's a great one. I think at Google, I saw a lot of product specialists, the people who kind of are this bridge between the product and eng team with the kind of the highest tier of customer support. And they often make amazing PMs down the road because they really understand the realities of rolling out features to new customers and kind of getting all the feedback first and then partnering with the PM team. And then the PM team gets to know these product specialists. And there have been times where we've poached and just said, wow, this specialist is so good, we should bring them on as a PM. So it definitely, the adjacent stuff and program managers, project managers, even like account managers, and then you kind of go out of your way to connect with the product team and give the product feedback and be the first to volunteer when they are looking for, early alpha customers to kind of help them get that done. Like those things go a long way.
Totally. And I'm just going to pat myself on the back because you said this while me saying it. My first role at Facebook was as a product specialist.
I forgot that, but I'm not surprised.
Everyone forgets it.
Well, Rodolfo, before we get into, we're going to talk about like your interviewing experience and maybe some of the things that were difficult for you, and then you kind of had this breakthrough insight. But before we jump into that, we've talked a lot about how it can be hard to break into product. Why is it worth it to try? Like why do people like this profession?
I'm going to give you a funny answer and then the actual answer. The funny answer is like, it's awesome to make things, and where you're not as smart as an engineer or as creative as a designer, the next best thing you can do is be a PM without taking on the risk of being a founder. But jokes aside, the reason I think the role is awesome is as someone that's like heavily a people person and also someone that likes to dabble in different things and different ways of thinking, PM is the best balance of that. In the sense that as a PM, my day is never boring or never repetitive because I'm working with different types of people throughout the day. If I was a software engineer or a designer, I'd have to spend my entire day coding, designing. As a PM, I get to like switch between these different modes of thinking. I'd say the other piece is if you're someone that really thrives in ambiguity and in the idea of you being the person that's giving a group of people direction, the PM role is unique. The more senior you become in other roles, you get to do this, but at the end of the day, it's always the product leader who is, in most companies, responsible for the direction of product and responsible for it, and has the responsibility for the ultimate success of it. So that accountability, because of the accountability, it doesn't matter if you have a peer that's your same level of seniority, you're the person that everyone's going to look to at the end of the day to make the final decisions. And again, if you enjoy that, the fact that you're the person giving that direction, then you should do this role.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer and aligns with my views as well. I would add that if you enjoy making hard calls with imperfect information, it's a really fun job because you kind of have to do that all day long. And you're able to do it at a level of seniority that's a little higher than what you would be allowed to do in other functions.
Totally.
And so now you're going to be held accountable, and you're going to, if your judgment isn't great, then that's going to make it hard for you to grow. But if it is, then you're kind of constantly making these 52-48 calls.
Totally.
Yeah. All right. So let's get into the interviewing experience for PMs. I work with a number of people now on both sides, actually, helping people prepare for interviews, but also helping product leaders identify talent. And I'm curious, I can't wait to hear your experience. Like, what was it like kind of trying to compete for these roles, and what were the learnings along the way?
I'd say, like, before diving into the nitty gritty, using like the article I mentioned, you gotta explain like what is the key thing before you go into the details. It's that like nailing an interview is more about the how than the what. And what I mean by that is nailing a PM interview, contrary to maybe some like engineering interviews, I'm like guessing here, or like a data scientist interview, there isn't one set answer for PM interviews. And because of that, your process that you're following is the most important thing. And I'd go even one step beyond. It's not just because it makes you a better interviewer, but it's because it makes it easier for someone to envision what it would be like to work with you. And a PM role is so much about how you relate with people, how you communicate with them and get that trust, that you need to be great at interviewing and helping guide people in this how of the interview versus the what. So in terms of like going back to your question, which was a little bit around like, hey, like how did I land on this process? And when did I unlock this piece, like this insight and the kind of like the framework that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. I'd say like when I first started interviewing for roles when I was a much more junior PM at Facebook, there what I would find is a big disconnect between how the PMs I worked with viewed my quality of thinking and work and the evaluation I'd get from their friends who would be okay interviewing me. There would be a big misalignment between the caliber of my thinking and how I worked when someone gets to see me a longer period of time than when someone just see me in the snapshot of like time. And I think there, I unfortunately didn't really get to like the framework that we're going to talk in a little bit entirely there, which made my process just like interviewing, doing these repetitive interviews, practice interviews, and not understanding why was it that I was missing these things. And I think one of the sins that I committed was I just stuck too much to frameworks. And I got nervous when things didn't fit to the framework, which is a very like junior PM way of thinking. Now, I was able to like get a good role at Reddit as a PM, I think because the role I took on as a PM at Reddit was the role I was already doing at Facebook. So with that, I could just naturally speak with this level of confidence. But fast forward 3 years later, when I finished my time at Reddit, when I graduated from business school, I'm applying to jobs again, and I'm struggling to get offers. I'm getting interviews, but I'm not converting those interviews to offers. And there, I don't have this benefit of going for a role that I've already done before. Because as you and I have talked before, I wanted to transition from being this PM that had done a lot of like algorithm stuff and also internal tooling stuff to a full-on consumer PM. Very different, not very different, but different enough that someone is going to bat an eye when I did 2 years of business school. Because a lot of companies are allergic to MBAs. As much as we don't want to admit it, but it is true a lot of times. And there, what I realized after the first round of interviews, I sat down with one of my really close friends who's PM at Meta right now. Funny enough, he was a PM at Spotify. He was a PM at Spotify and then at WeWork. I think he was at WeWork at this time. And he was just like, dude, I'm just having trouble following what your train of thought. Can you like repeat what you're saying once in a while? And that was the light bulb moment. And the light bulb moment that I had was the reason why there was a disconnect in these interviews that I'd done before, and the reason why these other people weren't hiring me even though I was competent for the role, was because I wasn't doing a good job at communicating how I was thinking. And that is the key thing you need to do in an interview. What you're trying to prove in an interview is that you are capable of executing your job. And the interview does that by measuring how you think. What is your thought process? How do you communicate that thought process from others? How does your thought process consistently lead you to certain outcomes in ways that other people can follow? And if someone can't follow you in an interview, they won't follow you in this process. And it's in an interview, it's even more difficult than in your day-to-day job, because in your day-to-day job, it's the other person's job to listen to you as a PM to a certain extent. Not when it's a cross-functional, like it's someone totally different team, but if it's your engineering manager, it's your design manager, it's your engineers, they're there listening to you. But if you put yourself in the context of an interview, so I mentioned the article, like, let's say that I'm like interviewing to be a PM at your company, Tom. Like you were probably just had a meeting. Maybe you just came off of this podcast and you didn't even get to decide when to interview me. It was just HR slotted it in because this was the only 30-minute slot you had, which is totally fine because they want to get this done. It's their prerogative, and you want to also get someone hired. And you are dropped in here and you see me, and maybe you had a chance to read my resume, maybe you didn't. Maybe you had a chance to like follow up on this interview question, or it's a new interview question that someone else designed, and you're giving it to the person. It's my job as an interviewer to ground you in this moment and help you focus so that we together can get to the outcome that we want in the interview and you can follow my train of thought. And before I go into the details, I want to like give you some space to like talk.
Yeah, I know. This is great stuff. I think it reminds me a little bit of doing UXR, where
Yeah.
you want the subject to kind of think out loud because you're trying
Mhm.
to understand how they're
Yeah.
arriving at their pleasure or displeasure with this new concept. And I think similarly, when PMs interview, sometimes, despite the caveats that the interviewer gives, they think, well, my job is to get to the right answer as quickly as possible.
Mhm.
And they might not even want to share their kind of thought process because they're
Mhm.
just trying to like say like,
Yeah.
oh, 27.2, you know. and
Yeah.
and in fairness to the candidates, there are some interviewers who do take the approach of like, oh, I asked this question, I'm looking for this exact answer.
Yeah.
And so sometimes candidates can sense that and feel like, oh, well, I need to just try and figure out what this guy wants me to say. But I think in general, that's not the best approach. And
Yeah.
to your point, if you can kind of lay out how you're doing it, um, the interviewer might be able to see things that they want to see. That doesn't necessarily mean that you end up with the 27.2 answer or whatever
Yeah.
the kind of thing you think they want to hear is. So yeah, this is great. Keep going.
Yeah. And I'd say, like, just following up exactly what you're saying, there is no way for you to 100% know if that person wants the 27.2 answer or not. And the only way you can 100% know is by straight up asking them. And the way you ask them is, you clearly state out your framework, you clearly state out what you're doing, you explain your thought process, and then before you move on to the next thing, you ask them, like, is this the route you want me to take? Is this the type of analysis you want me to do? Do these user segments resonate with the user segments that you wanted me to look at? And by doing that gut checking and clearly having your thought process laid out, you get a sense. The person can then tell you. And it's their job to tell you that. If you're interviewing at any company that gives people any sort of decent interview training, it's their job to correct you or not.
Yeah, that's a really important skill because it requires the candidate to have a certain amount of confidence and a
Mhm.
certain amount of ability to kind of, I wouldn't say own the room, but manage the conversation.
Yeah.
And if you're sensing like, wow, this interviewer, like, I don't think I'm going in the right direction.
Yeah.
I have seen cases where the interviewee will just wander on.
Yeah.
And earlier in my career, I sometimes would let them do that, but later I've realized like my job is to help see the best version
Yeah.
of this candidate as I can. And I might
Yeah.
kind of nudge them, but some interviewers won't do that, and they will
Yeah.
just let you wander around.
Yeah.
And it's great if the candidate says, I've taken this approach to try and figure out this problem that we're looking at. I'm sensing that I might not be demonstrating or kind of unpacking it in the way that is most helpful to you.
Mhm.
Is there any feedback you have for me before I continue?
Mhm.
You'd be surprised, like if someone said that to me and I were interviewing them, I would be like, well, actually, you're doing a lot of great brainstorming, but I was hoping we could get to some of the biggest trade-offs you're going to have to make
Yeah.
and why. And then, you can course correct. So yeah, totally agree. That's a great call out there that, you are kind of partly in control
Yeah.
of this conversation, and it's your job to make it, productive for everybody.
And there's like two things that are follow up there, Tom. Like, if the person can course correct, that almost makes them a better hire than the person that got it perfectly straight
Yes.
through, got the right answer, but didn't share their thought process.
Yes.
Because I am not sure then that if I send you off with some instructions, that you're going to be able to execute by yourself or how you're going to think. But if I know this person can course correct them, I know I can trust them, I can coach them in the future. And then the second thing I wanted to say is, if we apply the same conversation that we're having about not understanding what the other person in the room is thinking, this happens every day in your career as a PM. If you can't do it in an interview, it's going to be so hard to do it when you're talking to the director of the other org that you need to convince, or this principal PM that owns this other part of the product that you need to get approval to launch your new thing, or this marketing person, just rattling off the list of like different people. If you're not good at doing this in an interview, you're not necessarily going to be good at doing it in your job. But if you can do it in the interview, it's a skill you can apply to your day-to-day job as a PM.
100% agree. And I think a lot of people find it helpful if they go into the interview with the mindset of, hey, I'm going to have a fun conversation with Rodolfo. We're going to work on some cool, interesting problems together. And I'm going to try and help solve these problems. And you make it more conversational. Let's workshop it together versus like, oh, there's this guy, Rodolfo. I have memorized 12 frameworks and I hope I pick the right one and color, put the right colors and the right numbers. Those are tough interviews to even be on the other side because you don't really know, because you can sense like, okay, they're giving me a recipe. They're not helping me solve this problem.
Yeah. And you're bored. You're bored and you have so many other distractions in your day. Like the interviewer in a way needs to give you a reason to pay attention, which sucks, but it's like, it's their job because the person interviewing has a difficult day too. It's a lot of empathy that comes into this.
Rodolfo, can you give an example of a time, maybe like an example of an answer to, or the beginning of an answer where you don't lay out how you're thinking, like how you used to do it? And then maybe, now with this, applying this hack, like this is what you mean when you say, help them understand your thought process. This will help the audience kind of like really internalize it a little more.
Let me think of like what's like a couple of good examples right now about the thought process. So I think I don't have a photographic memory, so I can't literally go back to like an interview. But there is an interview question I love asking candidates, and I'll use that to illustrate this of how you talk through people through the thought process of like what you get to. My favorite question to ask people is, imagine you're the product manager for Disney Parks and Resorts, and the CEO of Disney comes to you and says like, hey, like what's the next thing we should build? And what usually happens when I have PM candidates do this, and when I did the first time I did this as well, was to think about immediately like, what are the digital products that I should build on top of like Disney? Like what are ways I can direct people from like Disney Park stuff to like Disney Plus or like different app experiences? And the way you get there is because you make the immediate assumption that because you're interviewing for a PM role, you need to build a software product. And you assume that the interviewer wants you to build a software product. But if when an interviewee, and the times after I realized this when doing this practice interview myself and then decided to go to people, it's like, wait, why am I deciding to build an app? Like, who is my customer and what is their need? And why am I limiting myself to building a software app when I'm talking about being a product manager for Disney Parks and Resorts, when Disney is a company that has a lot of great core competencies around operations where you can like mix technology and real world stuff, versus if you're building at like a Facebook, a Google, etc. Yes, you can do hardware, but they're mainly software companies, and that's where like the majority of their work is done. So it's okay to immediately make that assumption. And what I do with interview candidates is when they get to this realization, they ask me like, hey, actually, like since it's parks and resorts, do you want me to build an app or do you want me to build something for the park? I'll just tell them straight up like, no. Like, I want you to build something for the park. I'll just straight up tell them. Versus the people that go down a certain route, I have to stop them at a certain point and be like, hey, like, this is great, but like you building a separate app isn't going to exponentially improve the experience of like the thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people that go to these parks every day. Well, over the course of a year.
Yeah. Okay, so let's say the candidate is interviewing, and you ask them the question about the new parks experience. And let's say they either ask early or you guide them to like, you're looking for new actual experiences, not another app or web service of some sort. Let's say that they come up with an idea to have, and I'm just brainstorming, like, Disney After Dark. It's like a 24-hour like experience, and it's like less rides, but you obviously you're going at night or whatever.
Yeah.
What would be like, how much would you want them to explain why they propose this? Would you want them to kind of talk about other kind of big ideas that they could have, and maybe the way that they would prioritize them? Like, how much clarity do you want on the thought process of getting to that recommendation?
80-20. Like I'd say 80% of what I want is the process, 20% is the answer. As long as
Mm,
the idea isn't just totally crazy and nonsensical, like you're going to create some sort of like adult after party at Disney when Disney is like a kid brand. Like it can be adult only, but you're not going to have like, I don't know, like crazy experiences that you have in
yeah.
Vegas in Disney World. Like if, as long as the, how do I put it, as long as the solution aligns with your thought process that you set up, you can dream up whatever you want, but it's all about the process and me understanding that.
Yeah. So, Rodolfo, it sounds like when your friend of a friend or someone who's giving you a practice interview was like, "Hey, I'm having trouble tracking how you're working through this." What was the transition like? Was it like a light bulb went off for the subsequent interviews, or did you like, how did that go?
Yeah, I was like a light bulb, and I was realizing that part of the reason I wasn't doing is I was getting nervous. I wasn't doing well. I
Mm,
was getting nervous during interviews, and this actually helped me stop getting nervous. And the reason was I was taking too long to finish these interviews, and I was thinking like I just need to speed up. And by speeding up the speed of going through the interview, I was skipping parts of my thought process and then just
mhm.
getting stuck because I didn't know where I was in the interview. And by using this method where it's just like every time you're stuck or every time you are making a transition, you just repeat what you just did, explain why, and then say the next thing you're going to do and why, and check with the interviewer that that's what they want. I would catch myself if I was doing something wrong, but I would also like feel more encouraged. It would be the next step would make a lot more sense. It's almost like I'm just thinking out loud right here. It's almost like giving yourself a to-do list. It's very easy to follow a to-do list. It's hard to do things when you don't know what you need to do.
Mhm. Yes. Yeah, and I think I've seen that happen to interviewees where they kind of almost get themselves into circles and lose their
Mhm.
orientation because they're so
Mhm.
eager to kind of show off as much information as they can
Yeah,
in a short period of time. And uh, when that happens, I usually say to them, "You know what? Let's take a breath for a second.
yeah,
Let's take a beat. Help me understand how you're thinking about this at a much higher level. Let's zoom out.
mhm,
We don't need to go
yeah,
into, all of the frameworks right now."
yeah,
And I think that does help a lot of candidates. The thing is, you can't assume the interviewer is going to take that approach.
yeah,
There are probably, I would say, at least half, maybe majority of interviewers who are like, "Look, I'm busy. If you can't keep my attention and keep this going, like, sorry,
yeah,
no hire."
yeah,
Um, and so it does require self-awareness to know, like, okay, I'm spinning. I need to like
mhm,
take a breather. And that actually
yeah,
happens at work too sometimes. Like if
yeah,
you're in some high stakes product review and you're like losing it, like it's helpful to be able to say, okay, let me back up for a second. I'm here
yeah.
because I want to get this decision done. Da da da. Yeah. So this has been great. What would you say, Rodolfo, are ways that you used to kind of enter that productive state of mind? Because I think a lot of people, they're super smart,
Mhm.
they know the material, they've done their homework, but they just get in their own heads when the light turns on
Yeah,
and the other person shows up. How did you manage that?
yeah. I think in the beginning I used it was a crutch in a good way. Like just as like some interviewees are obsessed with like following a framework, I just became very intense about doing this in my practice interviews. Maybe even too much. Like my friend that was giving me practice even said like, "Dude, you don't need to do it this much." And I'm like, "I know, but I'm just using this as a way to like train my thought process." And then it just becomes muscle memory when you actually have to do it. It's kind of like Karate Kid, like wax in, wax off. You do it enough times that suddenly it's like, oh, I'm like blocking.
I love it. And what was your conversion rate from before this approach to after in terms of how the interviews went for you?
Man, it was a big, like I would say this was when I was applying for jobs after business school. And for the first round of interviews, I maybe sent like 50 to 100 applications and ended up getting one offer, 1 to 2 offers. The second time around, I decided to not take any of those offers and then maybe apply to like 20 more places. Um, of those, I decided to interview at like 10, got like 3 solid offers and decided to pick one. And then for when fast forward a year afterwards, when I applied to jobs after leaving Cameo for Spotify, I applied to 3 places, got 2 offers, got to the final round in all 3. One of them I didn't get, the other 2 I got, decided to pick Spotify.
Not too shabby. Not too
Yeah.
shabby. Good on you, man. Before we wrap up, Rodolfo, I did want to ask, like in general, we talked a lot about interviewing. What's some like career advice that either you've received or that you often give to other PMs that that you think are worth the audience contemplating as well, just in general?
Yeah, so it's the same advice I would give for the interview. It's like just like you get hired not because of what the end result is, but how you get there. You also get promoted as a PM and you grow as a PM because of how you do your work, not entirely what the end result is. Like for example, like maybe when you're like a very junior PM, you were lucky, you ship this product and move metrics that your company cares about. Great. You get a promotion, you get a salary raise. But then
Mhm.
you're eventually going to hit a ceiling where it doesn't matter how smart and how good of a PM you are from a thinking perspective. If you aren't good at getting other people on board, this is what I mean by the how. Convincing other people, making them feel heard, making them feel that they're part of the roadmap, that their opinion is valued, you're not going to get promoted and get higher roles because to drive impact at a higher scale, you are going to need other divisions in the company that are much farther from your closest sphere of influence to be aligned with you. So just remember that the most important thing as a PM is how you do your job and remembering that you need to be collaborative.
Yeah, that's great advice and increasingly prominent as you move up in the career ladder as a
Yeah.
PM. I think at some point, um, most PMs are going to be great at the fundamentals, and they're going to be great at figuring out roadmaps and
Mhm.
requirements and synthesizing stuff. And the ones that really shine are the ones that are able to do it in a way where everyone feels super excited and heard and feels like they have part ownership in that
Yeah.
success, and then they really want to work with you again. And when you want to be one of those PMs where when there's a really hard project and senior leadership is like, man, this is going to be a hard one, who do you have on there? And then if I say like, oh, I've got Rodolfo on it, and everybody's like, oh, okay, yeah, we'll be good.
Yeah.
Like you want that,
Yeah.
you want them to have that reaction. And part of that is the how. Is not
Yeah.
only that, Rodolfo has his track record and he has measurable impact, but the way he does it ensures that everybody has that kind of warm and fuzzy feeling,
Yeah.
and it works out, so the how is crucial.
Yeah. And then just building on that one point that I'd add is the reason the how matters is you're successful as a PM in your career when you have a lot of advocates. And you get these advocates are useful to you when you're in the company because they're going to help you get more opportunities, get more trust with other teams, move faster because you have this built-in trust with other leaders. But they're also important throughout your career because you're not
Hmm.
going to necessarily stay in the company, your same company throughout. Like I've built a relationship with you that I really appreciate. That I can go to you, ask for advice. I can do the same with PMs from when I worked at Meta, which was like 3 companies ago, because I have that. And if I somehow end up working at a company that they're there again, I know they'll immediately trust me. And it goes both ways. Like you will also develop relationships with people that as you inspire them, you trust them, and you'll be able to rely on them in the future, and they'll come to you. because of the
100%.
how.
It is a small world, and people remember the how sometimes more than the what.
Totally.
um, yeah, well, this has been great. Rodolfo, for those who want to kind of stay on top of your thoughts and learnings and reflections, what's the best way for them to kind of keep track?
Yeah, definitely. So I'd say the best way is follow me on LinkedIn or follow me on Substack. My Substack is at Rodolfo Days. And if you want a look into a more fun side of my life, you can look at me on Instagram. It's the same handle as my Substack. But look at me on LinkedIn. I follow Tom. So if you follow Tom, you can look at me up there as Rodolfo Diaz, or look me up at Substack as at Rodolfo Days.
Love it. And I put a link to your Substack in the description below for those watching on replay or who want to follow you with one click. And I really appreciate you coming on, my man. This has been great, and so glad to reconnect. And thanks for sharing. You know, a lot of people, kind of are focused on talking about all the things that work, and I appreciate you kind of giving the full story about, well, it wasn't always that easy, and you had a great learning. So thank you for doing that.
No, thanks, Tom. I really appreciate it. I hope people find this useful.
All right, my man. I'll talk to you later. See ya.
Have a good one. Bye.
Bye. All right. That was a fun conversation. Good guy. Yeah, down the road, if I ever need another PM, I might give Rodolfo a call. So let me give you some of my takeaways from the convo, and then I'll share maybe some upcoming plans. So first is on the interviewing side, I think the thing that Rodolfo brought up that really resonates with me is like your state of mind going into the interview. And if you go into the interview being like, oh my God, it's going to be like a final exam and they're going to test me on all these formulas, you could have an okay experience, but you may not knock it out of the park. If on the other hand, your state of mind is like, I'm going to go try and help this person solve a really interesting problem, and I'm going to be able to kind of walk in the shoes of what it's like being a PM with this person, I think your results will be much better. And part of that is you're giving yourself a little bit of grace that you don't have to nail the landing every other sentence. Secondly, it's going to feel more like a work meeting. And when I have written reviews of people after, my highest praise for someone who I might rate a hire or a strong hire is I would say something like, oh, Rodolfo did great. I felt like I was just in a work meeting with him, and I could easily see him on our team and being really successful. And that's just, you're never going to get an interviewer, or maybe not never, but it's rare for an interviewer to be like, oh, the candidate hit all 5 elements of the such and such framework. They might say that, but that's not really that as compelling as like, oh, I could see this person working on our team. I would like to be prioritized for matching if they make it through hiring committee. And I've said that about some candidates that I've interviewed over the years. So state of mind is really important. I think second is his main point, which is give people a little bit of a subway map of how you're kind of thinking this through. And as you're doing it, just walk them through and give them a little context on, okay, I'm thinking that for a big opportunity for the park, we have these fixed assets, but they're not used half of the day after the park closes. And so maybe we have a late kind of session at the park where it's for people maybe who don't have kids. Maybe you get a DJ, play some music. You still have all the rides and stuff. There's probably less lines, and it becomes like a thing for adults or teens or whatever. And the way you're trying to explain it is, my intuition is there's this unused inventory. And if we can match that inventory with an audience that's willing to pay for it, we've already borne all of the fixed costs. There are risks here. So now I'm thinking through, like, why wouldn't this work? Well, could be people would get in trouble. Would we offer alcohol or not? Does it harm the Disney brand? Blah, blah, blah. But as you can tell, like, I'm trying to think out loud and show you how I'm processing the information. So even if you as the interviewer are like, that's a dumb idea, you at least know, like, okay, he's got a method to that madness. And he is kind of self-critiquing, and he's trying to break it into parts. And so forth. So that's clearly like a great insight from Rodolfo. And then maybe the third thing I would share on PM interviewing success is, which we didn't get a chance to talk about. You can only hit so many topics in one of these interviews, podcast episodes, is the more homework you can do on the company, the better. I always appreciate it when someone says, oh yeah, I know you guys launched this thing last week, or I tried this new feature that you launched, or I was researching this competitor that you have. I noticed these things. That goes a long way, because I think interviewers know that, these candidates are talking to multiple companies. And if you've taken the time to kind of do a little more homework, that helps a lot. Now, that's not going to be nearly as impactful as Rodolfo's advice and the state of mind stuff that we talked about. But if you've done a little homework on the company, it can kind of give you a little bit of that edge. And it's kind of a natural self-selection thing, because you don't have time to do that much research on every company. So you'll end up doing it for the ones you really want to work at. And it kind of works out well that way. So those are my takeaways for you. If you like these kinds of conversations, but you just stumbled upon this one for the first time, you can follow me on LinkedIn. You can subscribe to my Substack. And the beauty of that is I put in the recorded video, the full video, but I also have like a text summary. Thank you, ChatGPT, of the whole interview and the key takeaways. So check that out. And then lastly, if you are a PM and you want some interview prep, I've been doing that a lot lately. Basically, I'll interview you kind of in character, and then I'll share what my interview report would have said, how I would have rated you, depending on what level you're interviewing for. And then I'll go into like, hey, there are some areas where I would have answered it a little differently. Like, here's what I would have done, or here's some ways that you can approach it a little differently. And then lastly, if you're on the other side and you're a product leader growing your team, I recently started helping a couple of companies with hiring to either source and vet candidates or help them onboard and train kind of earlier PMs. So a lot of fun activities at the Palo Alto Foundry as part of this Fireside PM stuff I'm doing. So hopefully this was helpful to you. If you found it useful, do me a solid and give it a like and a share, and I'll see you next time. Let's get back to work.